Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 8, Episode 20, presented by Salonis. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Our very special guest on this episode is James Reinhart, founder and CEO of ThredUp. Steve, we've been watching and talking about the circular economy or re-commerce players for pretty much ever since we've had this podcast. So it's great to get James on. He really was an important factor in this whole industry, and we've got lots of questions.
Yeah, he's a super interesting guy. When I saw him on stage at the World Retail Congress last month, I was reminded that we have been talking about having him on for quite some time. So decided to reach out to him, and he said yes. And I think people will find that it's a very interesting guy, very interesting and very important articulate business model.
Well, we will be together, you and I, yet again. We were together here in Toronto on executive dinner. We will be together in Barcelona, Shop Talk Europe, coming up real fast.
Yeah, we've got a lot going on. We'll be recording several episodes of the podcast so people can listen for that. But we will be on stage live 6 o'clock on Monday for people that will be there with a special episode. We'll be doing our typical news of the week, but we'll also be digging into why physical experiences matter more even in a digital world. And then on Wednesday at 2 o'clock, my session will be optimizing wholesale and DTC strategies. So something we've talked about a few times on the podcast, but I've got a great panel. Laura Fernandez from AWWG, which is the parent company of Pepe Jeans, Hackett, and Fastenab. Paco Valente, who's the Chief Marketing and Digital Officer of Hoth, a very fast-growing and cool sneaker brand. And then Sergio Azzolare, who's the CEO of Roberto Cavalli. So I think we're going to I've had all my prep calls. It's going to be super interesting panel. So if people are in Barcelona, be sure to catch us Monday at 6 or my session Wednesday at 2.
All right, Mr. Steve, let's talk about Shein. They've been in the news. They're always in the news, but they've been in the news with, what do we call it, like a charm offensive.
Yeah, they've been out there. So a couple of things have been going on. First of all, we talked about their IPO. They're still ideally, I think, wanting to go public on the New York Stock Exchange with London as a backup. But they've been out there for the last bit here, not only speaking at a number of conferences, but doing a lot of marketing. And in particular, the story that I actually contributed to an article about is their attempts to join the National Retail Federation. And apparently their efforts have been rebuffed so far. I think it's we could probably talk about this for 20 minutes, all the dynamics there, and I don't want to get into too much speculation, but
an association that represents retailers would say, well, you're not here. You're not hiring people. You're not contributing to the economy. You're just dropping product in. And whether it's Shein or anybody else, they would probably, that would be a big part of the hesitation, right? Not to make a qualitative judgment, but you're not contributing to the economy in the way that our members and members of the NRF, we like to have them do that.
I think that's part of it. I also think that Shein is generally viewed by at least the U.S. Retailers as not playing fair. And so for them to be let into the NRF, I think would cause, I imagine is causing a lot of ripple effects. Now, the NRF has not officially commented on this, so I do not know what their official position is. Some people have said that they're not aware that the NRF is in the business of turning people down or exactly what their rules are for membership. So it's a little bit of a controversy here, but definitely Shein is trying to, polish up their reputation just more broadly because they've not been getting the best press, but also, in advance of what is thought to be an IPO that is maybe not quite imminent, but second half of this year.
Let's talk about hims and hers and the GLP-1 opportunity. That's the GLP-1 impact on people and the economy is fascinating to me. The longer term impact from sizing to, I've even heard conference calls where airlines are thinking they're going to use less gas in the future because people will be lighter. Like it gets a little bit ridiculous, but this sounds like a really smart thing for them to be doing.
Yeah. So the context for this, which ties a little bit to one of my predictions about the growth in health services more broadly. So there's been a lot of discussion about the success of these GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic and the effect this is having kind of more broadly on retail, which maybe we'll come back to at some other point. But the specific thing last week is that Hims and Hers, which is a really cool business, I happen to own stock in it in the spirit of full disclosure, that started selling online erectile dysfunction drugs and hair loss drugs, but it's branched out into several other things. And it's really a great business model in terms of having high value items, great gross profit that they ship through the mail, but very low shipping cost, a subscription model, telehealth appointments. And so there's a lot of cool things about this business model that I think explains why they've been growing so nicely. But the particular thing was they announced that they will be doing a what's called a compounded version of these GLP-1 drugs for only $199 a month, which compares to over $1,000 a month for regular prescriptions. And the reason that they can do this is apparently there's a loophole, which I just learned about, that when certain restricted drugs are in short supply, pharmacies can create compounded drugs, so slight variations of these drugs with the related materials to deal with the short supply. And because this is a lot lower cost and they're not subject to the patents and all that kind of stuff, they're able to sell at a much lower price. So it's a creative opportunity. It's unclear how long Hims and Hers are going to be able to sell these drugs at the reduced prices, because presumably once the capacity is back online, they will not be able to do this anymore.
Right.
So it's an interesting short-term opportunity. I think it's particularly interesting for Hims and Hers because this will be a way for them to potentially acquire quite a lot of customers that are looking for these drugs, which are in short supply, and then sell them other things. So I think it is both an interesting near-term opportunity for them from a growth and revenue standpoint, but perhaps even more interesting strategically, sets them up for greater growth as they add more products and more customers ultimately to their subscription model. So definitely an interesting company to watch.
So we're in the heart of the earnings season. Let's start with Target.
Yeah, we'll just go through these pretty quickly. But we're going to be we got a lot of earnings this week. We won't go through all of them, but we'll be getting a bunch over the next couple of weeks. So we got Walmart last week, Target this week, and let's just say Walmart is kicking Target's ass at the moment. Target's results were quite a bit. Is that a
technical term? Is that
It's a technical term.
Term?
I learned that when I was in business school. But if you look at Target's, I forget exactly Walmart's comps, but Walmart's was closer to the 4% range. Target's were similar, but negative, down 3.7. Their digital business was up just slightly. Walmart's was up I think 22%. So we're really seeing a divergence in performance between the two big players here in the U.S. They're still decently profitable. They've done a good job taking costs out, but they're having a really hard time now for several quarters driving the top line. Now, we kind of knew that there was going to be a difficult earnings. I mean, I was not surprised that their earnings were bad to begin with, but earlier in the week, before the earnings announcement, they put out an announcement that they are lowering prices on quite a large number of everyday items. And it seemed like, number one, they really wanted to get out in front of the earnings report to give attention to this news, which in some respects I think is much more of a PR move than something substantive. I mean, Target clearly benchmarks pricing against Walmart anyway. I'm not sure that consumers really know that much about, a 20-cent difference in shampoo or something like that. But I think it's clear that Target is suffering from more of a mix towards discretionary items, not as strong a position in grocery, and so they needed to do something to sort of juice or support this idea that they are taking aggressive action. So we'll see. But at this point, I think it's pretty clear that Walmart has really been a star here, and Target has been a laggard. So we'll see if they can get back on track.
Let's turn our minds internationally. Marks and Sparks, as it's kind of known. Marks and Spencer has got a transformation going on. Big retailer. Looks like they're gaining momentum. Yeah, they started a program, I think about 2 years ago, to deal with what had been pretty lackluster performance, frankly, for a while. And the UK-based retailer, they are in some other markets, as people would know, are really starting to get some great momentum. First of all, their sales were up a lot.
9.4%.
Wow.
And they continue, the strength is, as many people will know, the strength of the Marks and Spencer business has been largely in food, whereas the apparel and home businesses have been pretty soft. But they saw good improvement in really all their categories. They had their best profits in 10 years. And so it's really nice to see a kind of mid-price department store type business model that is actually able to produce some good results and get some good momentum. Now, they still have a bit of a drag from their investment in Ocado, the delivery, whatever you call them, robotics.
Highly automated,
highly automated fulfillment company, though some improvement there as well. So this will contrast with some news we're going to have up next. But, it does show, they have a lot of work still to do, but it's a rare, I think, example of a transformation in kind of the unremarkable middle that seems to be gaining some traction, which is terrific.
Let's talk about Macy's. So, it's not the first time we talked about Macy's, but it looks like they're delivering a little bit of optimism in their news.
Yeah, a little bit. I think this is also a story that got a little bit ahead of itself in terms of people saying that the turnaround is really showing progress. But they did...
More signs of life than progress, right? More signs of life. Perhaps.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, it's very early. We're really, Tony Spring's only been at the helm, and a few of these things were in motion before he took the helm, but it's still very early. But Macy's had sales down only slightly. The thing that was most interesting, I think, is they have what they call their first 50 portfolio of stores. So these are 50 stores where they have put in a series of new initiatives. And those first 50 stores had positive comps slightly, not dramatically, and they're comparing against a pretty soft year. But what actually thing that I thought was most interesting is their net promoter scores. They said that the net promoter scores year over year in these stores had gone up by 5 full percentage points. And that's pretty significant.
That's a big movement.
Yeah. So now... on the more negative side, the net income was down materially. Their credit business, just like we talked about JCPenney last week, is deteriorating. They had higher markdowns. So it was pretty clear it was a fairly promotional quarter. So when you look at the price action they took, maybe not too surprising that the sales weren't down quite as much as they've been. So they're a business that is barely breaking even at this point. They did talk about, continuing to open Blue Mercury stores, a few more Bloomies. They did not talk about Market by Macy's, which has been something they've been talking about for the last year. I don't know if they just didn't have the time to do it, or perhaps I've been hearing the results there are not so great, but that may or may not be true. So a little bit of progress there, but I would say we're going to have several more quarters before we can really get a sense of whether there's the kind of traction that we talked about with Marks and Spencer.
Watch this space. Let's talk about TJX. We're big fans. I'm a big fan. I know you are of both the business model and the team there in terms of their execution. Talk about what you're hearing from them at the end of their quarter.
Well, as we've talked about, the story of the struggles in department stores for 10, 15, 20 years at this point has been the leakage of market share to off-price retailers in particular. And so we continue to see with the reports from JCPenney being down 9, Macy's down 1 or 2, Dillard's down 1 or 2. We'll see Kohl's, I guess, next week. We continue to see the off-price retailers put up good numbers. So TJX, which has as many banners across 9 different countries, but they've got 5,000 stores. And, so it's quite a footprint. They had 6% overall growth. So not amazing numbers, but again, you compare 6% overall growth to the department stores, which are, down between 2 and 9%.
Yep.
And, same pattern really for several years now. Strong profits. They did raise their guidance again. So they're able to not only grow the top line, but they're growing the bottom line nicely. And the other thing they talked about, which I still have a hard time getting my head around these numbers, is they see the potential to open at least 1,300 more locations. I just still wonder how high is up, because I feel like, here in Dallas, I drive, 2 minutes and I see, so many stores. So I'm not sure which countries or which parts of the different countries have so much greenfield opportunity for them. But they are quite confident about not only driving comp store growth, but driving growth through plenty of new store openings.
All right, busy week. Let's leave it there. Now, before we get to our great interview with James Reinhart from ThredUp, let's hear from our presenting sponsor, Celonis. Want to ramp up speed and productivity for your entire retail operation? In the Celonis Process Mining for Dummies Handbook, we show you how Celonis process mining technology, enhanced with process intelligent AI, can help you streamline performance across your entire retail business so you can drive lasting value from end to end. That means purchasing, supply chain, omni-channel execution, merchandising, and customer service processes, all managed and optimized through one powerful software solution. To get your free copy of Process Mining for Dummies and see how it's generated millions in value for brands around the world like Aldi, Globus, and Edeka, head to celonis.com/remarkable retail.
James Reinhart, welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast. The last time I saw you was in Paris and you were on stage, and now we've got you here on the mic. So welcome. Where do we find you today?
Well, thanks for having me. I am in our office in Oakland, California, which is a little different from Paris, France.
I've been to both, and yes, I picked that. I'm not always the most observant person, but I did pick that up right away. But we're glad to have you here. Usually, we just like to kick things off by learning a little bit more about our guests. So, would you mind taking a minute or so just to tell us a bit about your personal and professional journey and how you find yourself in the seat and role that you have today?
Sure. I grew up in New Jersey, so I'm an East Coaster through and through. I went to public school, grew up in Central Jersey, went on to Boston College, and became a teacher right out of college. So not necessarily the path to remarkable retailing, but I was a teacher for a few years, and then I became very interested in public education and business. And so I then transitioned and I did a joint degree in business and public policy at the Kennedy School of Government and Harvard Business School. And then when I was in business school, I was, as I said, I was a teacher earlier, which means I didn't have any money. And so I went to sell my clothes at the local consignment store when I was in business school. They wouldn't take them. And that was the founding moment of, man, this seems like an opportunity. And that began what is now, a 15-year journey of thinking about resale and where that can take us. So,
well, I should,
in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, it's super interesting. I should mention we do have some things in common. I spent some time in Central New Jersey, Exit 7, in case you want to. If you're wondering about
Perfect.
that,
Exit 114. So okay, I know where Exit 7 is. Yeah, you're a Turnpike guy though.
So. Yeah, Turnpike guy. Yeah. But I'm sure 95% of our listeners are going, "What happened?
What's happening?"
Sure. As well as a little time across the river from the K School. So anyway, but maybe just real quickly, maybe just a bit about the transition between. Not much of a business background into running a business. What has that transition been like?
Yeah, I think when I reflect back on it, when I became a teacher and then ultimately I was helping this charter school in California, I was very committed to how can I make an impact in the world where I can do something that I'm passionate about, but that also makes some sort of difference. And I think that became the reason I wanted to go back and get a degree in business and public policy, because I thought there was something magical about when business and government work together. I think you can create really positive outcomes. And so I think that's sort of what got me interested in business. And then what I found was that there were lots of problems, to solve, right? I think going to the Kennedy School of Government really opened my eyes to so much of what was broken, right, across the world. And then what I found really powerful about resale and apparel was that there was just a real market failure, and we can talk about that, but I just saw this broken market in apparel that felt like something that I was excited to work on, that felt like a big problem, and that felt like I could make a real difference. And I think that sort of through line in my career has been that. And so, so not obvious, but I think in retrospect, it's actually it's a straighter line than people might think.
It's a super interesting intersection of the personal and the professional. We often find that with founders. We were just talking to the founder of Untuckit, who said, I couldn't find a good shirt to wear in a more
sure.
prosaic example. But let's pull the lens back a little bit. And you said you found a seam in business or a seam in retail, and should we call it re-commerce? I'm not sure if you found a seam or just created a whole new industry. I mean, it was there in the cottage industry. But let's start big picture with the re-commerce space. You put out a great report. I've been doing that for a number of years. But help our audience understand the scale, scope, the different sectors, how you and your team think about the sector or the industry of re-commerce, and then what are the key drivers that make it go up, down, or sideways?
Yeah, it is. When I look back, I mean, we started the business, and the kernel was in 2009, right? And so that was a very different place. I mean, the iPhone had just been invented. Your commerce platforms at the time for secondhand were eBay, and Craigslist was still a very big deal. But there wasn't a lot of innovation in apparel, broadly at that time, or I would say it was just getting started, right? That was a time, if you guys remember, you had Gilt Group, right, which was a big deal in 07, 08,
right.
2009. You had, Bonobos as one of the first direct-to-consumer companies was founded. Shortly thereafter, you had, Warby Parker. And so there was a number of companies that were emerging around, inventing new consumer experiences. If you think like that's when Netflix started to get into streaming, Spotify. So you had all these ways in which consumers were engaging in different ways. And I think at the time I thought it's hard to believe that there isn't an opportunity to really reinvent how secondhand works online. And so I think from 2011, 2012, we saw e-commerce penetration growing. We saw people shopping on their mobile phones. But we had not really seen a lot of innovation in secondhand. People were still predominantly doing this on eBay or Craigslist. And so I think we really became a catalyst for, okay, well, what would you do to fundamentally reinvent how secondhand works? And so our sort of analysis was that the way people were shopping offline, going to thrift stores, consignment stores, mom and pop vintage stores, those were all, for the most part, sort of, they were okay experiences, but they weren't amazing, right? Nobody walks out of a Goodwill, despite all the great work that Goodwill does, and says, oh my God, best retailing experience ever, right? And so we just thought there was a way to bring people online. And that's, I think, what we did. But one of the key tenets of that, Michael, was that we wanted to help people understand how to participate in this market in an effortless way. And so what we did not want to do was duplicate eBay, right? And just sort of make people buy and sell directly.
Right.
And I think that's sort of the key innovation for ThredUp is we built what has become now in vogue, like a managed platform. But at the time, that was like not a concept people were really familiar with.
So how would you, you mentioned thrifting and vintage and there obviously have been these relatively small and, like you say, not necessarily tremendously remarkable concepts. But when you think about the consumer side of this, how would you describe and segment the different customers? And then I guess how has that driven the way you've designed ThredUp and the way it's evolved?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you could visualize a classic 2x2, I think in one example, one sort of axis would be, does the consumer who participates in resale or re-commerce, are they doing the bulk of the work themselves? And, I would characterize that as peer-to-peer. And I often put that on your x-axis, right? You've got peer-to-peer on one side, that's eBay. And then you have managed, where really the consumer is not doing a whole lot of work. They send us the clothing, right? Or they drop it off somewhere. And I would consider that managed. So that's sort of your x-axis. And then I think on your y-axis is, what is the price point of those goods? And so if they're luxury products can be, consignment stores that sell real high quality goods. It could be the Real who sells on a premium good, or it could be, discount goods where you would put Goodwill, say, on the opposite side of that. And so what we're trying to do is think about how does the consumer interact in the retail environment, and then what's the price point? And I think where ThredUp sits is we try and help consumers shop mass retail, right? We think about ourselves as a mass market, and we want to do all the work for them. And so I think that then juxtaposes against luxury, it juxtaposes against peer-to-peer, but that's really how we break up the quadrants. And we do that because I ultimately think two things are true. One is the mass market, at least in the data that we look at, is more than 6 times the size of the luxury market. So it's much, much bigger to focus on mass, despite, economics are on a unit level are probably incrementally more challenging. And then the second is that I think consumers are only going to get lazier. And so the idea that people, right, I fundamentally believe
this is getting a little too close to home now.
Right. But that's I really do believe that. And so I think the more work we do for them on the seller side and the easier we do to make them shop, I think we're going to be on the right side of history. So anyway, that's how I frame the problem.
I know that's super helpful. And by the way, I've never met a 2x2 matrix I didn't like. So that resonated with me automatically. But so as the business has evolved, as I understand it, you've got the kind of marketplace, for lack of a better term, part of it, but you've also partnered with retailers to help manage the resale or e-commerce for them. Can you talk a little bit about how each of those work and how they've developed?
Sure. I mean, the bulk of our business is the marketplace, and you described it correctly. We think about it as our core marketplace, and so that just we help customers send us all of their stuff either in a bag or a box. We process it for them. We list it online for them. It's all on consignment. We then make it available for buyers. Buyers buy it. We ship it to them. Like you're shopping online. So our core marketplace business feels much more as a traditional, secondhand commerce experience. What we do on the resale as a service side, so it's called RaaS, resale as a service, and this started in 2018. So we're about 5 years into it, where we thought we built such great software, technology, infrastructure. We've really figured out how to do this at some scale. How could we supercharge this in a way that makes a bigger impact? And I think we were humble in the way in thinking about, hey, we're going to be able to go faster if we have brands and distribution and sort of a bigger footprint on our side. And so we started talking to brands and we said, hey, can we help you join the circular economy? And they said, yes, we would love your help. And so now we partner with brands where we help, primarily manage a take back. So we manage a take back program for them, whether that's in store or online. So their customers can do the same thing, clean out their closet with all the brands that we work with. And then we stand up resale shops for these brands where you could go to, for example, you could go to jcrew.com right now. And in the navigation of JCrew, you could see a link to shop their pre-loved collection, which is all secondhand goods that you can shop on JCrew. And we power that on the back end. So JCrew doesn't need to deal with any of that on their end. Everything kind of runs through ThredUp. And so we do that now for more than 50 brands, big brands, small brands, luxury brands, non-luxury brands. And we think it's a great opportunity for us and for brands to keep going.
You've been at this, 15 years, and I figure probably very close to the first day when you went to school, the concept of sustainable competitive advantage would come up or came up.
Yeah.
You've got I mean, you've created a category and made it, brought it to great attention. What differentiates you from some of your other competitors, and how do you keep that differentiation clear so that you get those excess economic rents? Look at me talking all economics, but if you know what I mean,
Yeah. No, look, it's I'm actually glad you asked. I mean, I think one of the things that I think we do not get enough credit for in the public markets actually is for the deep competitive advantages that we have built, right? I think we've invested an enormous amount of time, capital in building very, very hard infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. Like a reverse logistics machine that I would put up against, anyone in the world. And I don't think it gets quite the appreciation of how hard that would be to build at this point. Now that we've got a decade, long technology advantage, and with interest rates at 5, 6, 7%, it would be so costly right now for somebody to compete with ThredUp's infrastructure. You just don't see it happening. And so we've built this infrastructure competitive advantage, and then we've got all this data. We're 150 million-ish pieces of unique clothing through our ecosystem.
Wow.
So tremendous data advantage. And then the third is we've built a marketplace, and marketplaces are hard to build. And so I often tell people that any one of those three things, infrastructure, data, marketplace, any one of those things, actually you can build a real competitive advantage around. But when you put three of them together inside the same company, then you've really done something. And so anyway, it's a sort of a tangent of I think people often don't understand that piece.
Yep.
The way I think it helps us show up against about competitors is I think it's hard for people to compete with us directly. And so now if you think about the brands that are competing with us, directly on our core business, there aren't any really, right? You have a Poshmark on the peer-to-peer side. We obviously overlap some with eBay, but there's not a big new competitor in our space that is capitalized for success in the past 10 years. And so I think we've sort of built a real advantage that people find it's hard to close that gap. So where we do compete actually is in RaaS, in resale as a service, where it's much more of a nascent part of our business. I don't think the competitive advantages are quite as deep, although they're deepening every day. And so we compete with other startups that are trying to sell into brands. And so I think we think about that as we ultimately think we have the best product and the best opportunity to support brands, and we can do that at the lowest cost. But there might be some noise in the near term.
Let's talk for a minute about your resale report. It certainly is popular with the media. It's well received, and I think part of that is because it starts to get at the, this total addressable market, right? How big is the resale market? So it's you've been doing this for quite a while. Where did the idea from that come? And talk about the report itself, but also what are some of this year's findings?
Look, I take a lot of pride in the resale report because it's one of those things that I think this is our 13th year doing it. It's either 12th or 13th. I think it's 13th. And I remember talking to the team back when we first did the first one and being like, hey, I want to do this industry report and start to get some facts out. And they're like, well, who's going to read it? I was like, I don't know. Probably nobody. But nobody reads it in the first year. I was like, but I remember so confidently being like, but 10 years from now, it will become the standard. And everyone's like, sure. And it, right. But it's funny because we joke about that sometimes. And you have to sort of take a leap on this stuff. And I think we had great teammates who worked on it for so many years. So it has really become a standard sort of state of the industry. So I think we have a lot of pride, in the resale report. I think every year that we try and think about, okay, what's new this time? And I think that there's a couple things that I think are really new this time. This is the first time that we've ever seen it where more people are shopping secondhand online versus in store. So it's the first inflection point, right, where the majority are online instead of offline, and that's not because people are not shopping offline. It's just you see more and more people shopping online. So I think that's one that's really important. The second is that remarkably, what gets a lot of airtime in the industry is Gen Z. It's all about Gen Z, young people, right? And I think what's interesting about resale is that it really does transcend, age and demographics. So you see lots of people in Gen Z for sure, but millennials are very strong, participant in secondhand. Gen X, very strong participation in secondhand, and then baby boomers, very strong participant in secondhand. So I think that's the second one where we tried to bring some awareness to this isn't just a young person's game, right? It really does transcend age. And then the third one, because we've already talked about RaaS and resale as a service, that's also growing. The third one is that given it's a presidential election year, we wanted to bring some awareness to how consumers are thinking about sustainability and sustainable fashion, circular economy, and how that might impact their voting. And so we definitely saw some real trend around how consumers say they're more likely to vote for a candidate, that supports sustainable fashion. They want government to get involved. Retail executives say, government can help them create incentives to engage in circular business models. So that was kind of the third thing. And we're excited about that. We think there's lots of room for government to do good here.
So I want to pick up on kind of where you were going. There's part of me, I'm not sure exactly what my question is here, but I'll see if I can find it. There's part of me that feels like the circular economy should be a lot bigger than it currently is. When you hear about all these trends, you hear about, obviously, some of it gets to the demographics, as you talk about. It's not necessarily Gen Z or whatever, but kind of these ideas that younger customers really want purpose-driven brands. But then you see the growth of companies like Shein and Temu, which don't seem to line up at all with that idea. So I guess my question is, would you agree that the circular economy has kind of obviously you'd like it to be bigger, but is there something going on there in terms of why it's not even bigger and why you're not seeing? You've obviously seen very, very good growth rates compared to the apparel at large, but you haven't really seen it get kind of this hyper growth that I would have expected a few years ago based upon the trends and based upon having companies like you put out a new business model.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Steve. I think it has something to do with the psychology of we all want to do things that we ultimately know are better, for us, and we think better for our futures. But in the moment, it's hard to say no to cheap fashion, right? It's you'd also think that with all of the information we have about fast food, right? And all the things that we know that are bad for us, that why do those guys still exist? Well, because it turns out that there is a consumer. There is a fight going on for that consumer, and incumbent fashion brands, incumbent fast food restaurants, incumbent, pick your poison. Why do people still smoke? Right? It's just hard to believe given everything they know. And so anyway, I guess it's a roundabout way of saying, I think that sustainable fashion, secondhand, will always compete against a quick, easy, cheap, new item. And I think Shein and Temu have done an incredible job of building supply chains that can give the people what they want. And so I think it's complicated. But I do think over time, I think I like secondhand's chances to continue to make to sort of eat away at share, but I don't think it's going to happen overnight. And I think that's the mission that we're on, right? Is to help people make this transition in their lives. And I wish it could happen faster, but I'm also prepared for the fact that changing consumer behavior is darn hard over time.
Yeah, as it turns out. It's a quick question. I don't know if it's a quick answer before I turn it over to Michael. Is I feel it's like sort of the elephant in the room with with many of the disruptor brands that have been around for a while, is that the growth may have been really nice and may have created a whole new category, or not maybe. I think you absolutely have, but profitability has not necessarily been there. What would you say just generally as a response to this kind of criticism, but also how you see getting on a better trajectory, I guess, for lack of a better term, to profitable growth?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you asking. So I think one of the things that is unique, well, it's not unique in our business, but something that I think gets muted is, we bought a business in Europe almost 3 years ago now, called Remix. It operates in 9 countries in Central and Eastern Europe. And that business was much newer in its infancy. And so we're actually putting a bunch of investment behind that business. And our U.S. business is actually, we just printed our third quarter of profitability and free cash flow positive in Q1. We're public, so all this stuff is easy to find. And so our core marketplace business, core business in the U.S. has been profitable for several quarters. So I think we're starting to put to rest the idea that these business models can't make money. I think the Real also has put positive EBITDA up, and so. But again, we're on a consolidated basis. Our European investments, right, have dragged on that. But I will say that I think over the past 5-7 years, up until over the last probably 2 years, so I would say from 2018 to call it 2022, you were not paid for profits, right? And I think entrepreneurs and businesses they were realists, right? And you got paid for growth. And so when you got paid for growth, that's what you did. And, we went public in 2021 where there was no concern for profitability in the near term, right? It was how fast can this business grow? And so then when the markets shifted, we've had to evolve our strategy. And I think we've now gotten to a better place, a year plus later. But I think that's the answer, right? And I think what you'll find with a lot of these disruptors is that they will ultimately become profitable. And then the question is, how fast can they grow while being profitable, and whether guys like ThredUp can outgrow, the more traditional incumbents. And I think we can, but we'll have to put up those numbers to prove it.
Well, last question for you. Between demographic trends, affordability, and the times we're living in, it seems your model is right for the time. So what's next for ThredUp?
Well, I mean, I think we're continuing to spend a lot of time. This is not going to surprise you, Michael. We're spending a lot of time on AI, and I think that, and I've been very public about this. I think AI is underhyped. I don't think it's overhyped. I think it's going to be such a radical transformation for so many businesses, and I think for ThredUp, where we just launched 3 new products in the last couple of months, and 2 of them we launched last week. And that really take advantage of newfound capabilities in AI that frankly just did not exist a year ago.
Are you talking like predictability, inventory, like practical things?
No, I'm talking about front on the front end consumer side. So we're now able to use a couple of things that we've built that sit on top of an open AI model that allow us to better tag all of our items in real time, which makes them more searchable for our consumers, and so just delivers a better customer experience. We just launched a product that's very similar to if you've played around with Google Lens. Think about it as like a Google Lens type product where you can take a photo or upload a photo of any item or of any outfit that you see. So you see a woman walking down the street, you're like, oh, I love that outfit. Snap a picture or pull something off of Instagram. We can immediately run that through our database of 4 million plus items and find those items secondhand, in real time. And then the third one is, and this is the one I think is going to be most exciting, is around generating outfits based on consumers' sort of needs. So I'm going to a wedding in the Bahamas and I want outfits for 5 days because it's going to be a fancy event. And we can generate those outfits, like the imagery of those outfits, and then use those same items to then, help build you a cart or an assortment. And so almost like a personal stylist using Gen AI technology, but that's going against millions and millions of secondhand items. So you can probably tell in my voice, I'm very excited about this. Yeah. They're going to change the way the consumer engages in secondhand. And I think we're really at the forefront of that.
I want to go and use that tool and put in, I'm going to the Eurovision finals. What should I wear?
You should do that. I'm curious.
You're in the Eurovision finals. Yeah.
I'm in the finals.
Well, your listeners can find it. It's not public to everyone, but if you go to the thredup.com/concept, you can actually see these products because they're not public to everyone, but you can kind of mess around with them and find your Eurovision outfit.
Ooh,
so you should share it with everyone.
We got an exclusive. Awesome. Well, James, thanks so much for joining us on the mic. It's been years, and Steve and I have talked about getting you on the mic and talking about this model. So finally, we were able to all get it in the same place at the same time. So a real treat to speak with you. And again, on behalf of Steve and myself, thanks for joining us on the Remarkable Retail Podcast, and wishing you much continued success.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me on.
You know what I really enjoyed, or I guess I should say my observation of our interview with James, was how the intersection of the personal and the professional came together with him. I mean, he's got his background in just trying to solve a big global problem that turned out to be a business model that really he was a forerunner and that he created.
Well, it's a bit of a cliche to say follow your passion, but I agree. It's really nice when people can connect their career with something that gives them purpose and they're really passionate about. So we don't always lots of stories of entrepreneurs that are just out to make a killing, right? As opposed to really doing something for the world. So yeah, I think he's a really, really interesting guy, and he's gone through a lot with that business in a relatively short period of time.
I loved your question around, let's talk about, so to speak, the elephant in the room. Like, you're not making a lot of money, and is the business model really going to work? And his response was fascinating to me that, he wasn't, if I could paraphrase, incentivized to put forward a plan that made money. He was incentivized to put forward a plan that grew, that showed tremendous growth.
Yeah, I think, and we'll see how this all pans out, not just for ThredUp, but for, a bunch of these other companies, the so-called wobbly unicorns we've talked about for a couple of years of how successfully these companies are able to make the pivot. Because for sure, there was this moonshot mentality that was very much driving many of these founders and their owners, the venture capitalists that were behind them for many, many years. And then for various reasons that turned out not to be something that was terribly workable. So can you make the pivot? Have you not spent through too much capital or created such a balance sheet problem or built capacity that's really hard? Store investments. I mean, ThredUp's lucky, right? And then they don't have the investment that some of these other companies, like an Allbirds, does, let's say, in their physical assets, right, and liabilities that are associated with that. So in some respects, not that the pivot is easy, but some companies will be able to pivot more effectively, more quickly than others. So it's part of the reason why we've talked about this reset that's been going on with many of these brands over the past year or so. And some will, I'm sure, navigate it successfully, and others perhaps not so much.
Thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Season 8, presented by Celonis, will air every Tuesday. Be sure and tell your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us. And if you liked our episode, please take a moment to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts.
I'm Steve Dennis, author of Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption, and my brand new book, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, which is available in hardcover, ebook, and Audible formats just about anywhere you prefer to buy your books. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker, and media entrepreneur. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.